A reading from the second letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, whoever is in Christ is a new creation. The old things have passed away. Behold, new things have come. And all this is from God, who has reconciled us to himself through Christ, and given us the ministry of reconciliation. Namely, God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. So we are ambassadors for Christ, as if God were appealing through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. For our sake, he made him to be sin who did not know sin, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. The word of the Lord. When you're in formation to be a friar, you often find yourself in places where you never expected to be. And so it was about a week ago, I descended the steps into a church basement to visit a meeting of a group called Narcotics Anonymous, which is like Alcoholics Anonymous, but for people who are addicted to drugs. And as I heard these addicts one by one tell their story to one another, I realized that I was in a group of people who were deeply aware of their own brokenness and weren't going to hide it anymore. And yet at the same time, I don't think they're so unique. I think each of us is an addict in our own way. While it may not be to any particular substance, we remain addicts to whatever vices we do hold on to. Our resentments, our grudges, our anger. And I think in some way that's why this season of Lent is so popular. Why we see more people in church on Ash Wednesday than we do on Christmas or Easter. I think everybody has some parts of themselves that they don't particularly like. Now, of course, there's one way of looking at Lent, which is to look at what we do as kind of belated New Year's resolutions, right? Bad parts about ourselves that we can kind of chip away at, good parts that we can build up. Work harder and harder each day to be a little bit better. But I think at the end of the day, that only leaves three possibilities. One, we'll fail and we'll fall into despair. Two, we'll succeed and we'll fall into self-righteousness. Or three, we'll have mixed results and we'll fall into the neurosis that comes with not knowing whether you'll actually be able to hold on to the gains that you've had. I think the folks at NA give us a better way. For those of you who don't know, the Narcotics Anonymous folks, they follow the 12 steps that you might be familiar with. The first step is that we admitted that we were powerless over our addiction and that our lives had become unmanageable. The second step is that they came to believe that a power greater than themselves could restore them to sanity. That's what St. Paul is talking about here. You know, it's interesting, when we talk about reconciliation, it's easy to put it from our perspective. But Paul reverses this. It's not us who do the reconciling of ourselves to God. It's God who reconciles himself to us in Christ. Reconciliation, sanctification isn't about fundamentally what we do, but it's about what God does. Even when Paul is imploring the Corinthians to undergo this process of conversion, he gives them a command, be reconciled to God, but it's a command in the passive voice. Reconciliation isn't about what we do, it's about accepting the grace that has been offered to each and every one of us. I think even as religious, maybe especially as religious, it's easy for us to fall into the Superman approach to spirituality. That if we keep trying harder, will eventually be better versions of ourselves. But Jesus doesn't offer that we merely be better versions of ourselves. He offers that we be new creations, that will be created anew in a way that is even more profound and even more mysterious than when we were created the first time. In a similar way, what one might expect that in the 12 steps, the end goal might be, well, that somebody no longer drinks or uses drugs, or maybe no longer wants to. The 12th step is to have had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, and to carry this message to others. I think this is one of those times when we have the most to learn from the little ones. A wise friar recently told us that our order has the greatest mission in the world. And I think he's right. How much more would this truth transform our preaching if we didn't merely see ourselves as experts, but as St. Paul says, as ambassadors, in which we represent not merely a body of thought or a philosophy of life or a self-help book that teaches us to be a little bit better, but that we represent a person, Jesus Christ. In the season of Lent, we have to remember and we have to preach to others that Christ doesn't merely offer us to be righteous by human standards, but in Him to become the righteousness of God.
Yeah.